It's much worse than anyone really understands yet. We are in the early stages of a housing market decline that when it's finished, and I think it could last 2 or 3 more years, we're going to look back and it's going to be the greatest housing market downturn.
Charlie Lamdin says the housing market is in an unprecedented mess caused by wrong incentives for agents and government intervention.
Every time a government has meddled in the housing market, without exception, there are no exceptions to this, they've made things worse.
Right.
So the first thing is, leave it alone.
He says new homes are not being built because developers cannot make profit.
New build volumes of sales and new build starts are at historic lows. And the reason for that is because nobody can any longer afford to pay the prices that the developers need in order to sell them at a profit.
Right.
Build costs in some areas are now higher than the value of the finished building. So therefore, it's impossible to make a profit in some areas.
Charlie warns the upcoming renters' rights bill will make things worse for renters and for the homeless.
What they're doing is going to cause the biggest chaos in the rental market in living memory. It's going to be I can't overstate how much trouble it's going to cause. Not only stuff that we can see is going to go wrong because of the way they're doing it, but the unintended consequences beyond that.
Welcome to British Thought Leaders. I'm Lee Hall. Today I'm sitting down with housing industry commentator Charlie Lamdin. Charlie, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
If we look at the news, social media, we see people saying the housing market is broken, talking about prices, some talking about supply. Let's just start with, what's your view on the state of Britain's housing market?
The housing market is in a hot mess. Arguably the worst I've known it in my 30 years in the industry. But there's a common misconception that it is the market itself that's broken. The housing market's not broken. And where movers and agents come prepared, you can still buy and sell a house relatively quickly. It is possible to do that. So why is it so difficult for most people? Because the incentives for all of the different parties involved in the industry have become misaligned and counterproductive. I'll give you the biggest example of that, for example, is a lot of very large corporate estate agents have incredibly lucrative referral deals with mortgage lenders and large conveyancing firms, to the extent that they make more money on those referrals than they do on selling a house.
Really?
So that becomes problematic if you're a seller. You think, you go to an estate agent and say, please sell my house. You think that's what they want to do. And yeah, sure, they'll sell your house, but only as and when and how it suits them to do so. Classic example, Panorama covered Connells forcing buyers to take their in-house mortgages before they would show them the house. And I've got countless examples from my followers on the Moving Home with Charlie social media channels of cash buyers trying to buy through those kind of agents, finding out later that their offer was never communicated to the seller.
Really?
Because the agents would have missed out on their commission for selling a mortgage to a different buyer. So this is an example of the incentives being wrong. And a lot of people say, oh, we need new tech, we need new laws. No, I promise you, both of those things only make it worse. And I'm a technology provider. I make my living selling tech to estate agents, and I'm saying there's too much tech in estate agency. And that the problem is, again, misaligned incentives. And I could go down a long list of them. The true responsibility for the state of the housing market rests squarely with governments of the last 30 years. And I say 30 specifically because it was in the mid-90s when lending was unleashed and buy-to-let products were made available to retail investors effectively.
Right.
And that unleashing of huge amounts of lending and allowing anybody to become a buy-to-let landlord investor is what drove house prices over the next 20 years, with a blip, of course, in 2008, but that was a credit-related blip, not a market-related blip. But where we are now in 2025, it is a market-related slide in prices and in some areas of the market in transaction volumes, and none more so than the new house builders who are, just this week there was the Molior house building report came out, historic low new starts and sales. So there's never been fewer sales of new builds than there are now, according to that report, which is staggering. Now, you'd think, well, hang on a second, with a rising population, surely the demand is there.
Yeah, exactly.
But demand without finance isn't demand. And as anyone who's been paying attention knows, our wealth as individuals, but collectively as a country, has been flatlining at best and actually coming down in real terms for about 20 years. So we have a less affluent population with relatively higher house prices. And you've got, especially with the Help to Buy that's now finished, thank goodness, for buyers and for affordability, thank goodness it's finished. But for the house builders, the Help to Buy scheme was effectively artificial stimulus on the back of which they sold millions over 10 years of new homes at very highly inflated prices. And we now have a large number of people who bought new builds, especially in London, where it was 40% the government was lending. I mean, that's a staggering boost to prices. Okay, we now have an increasing number of people, and it's relatively unreported, who cannot sell the new build they bought 5 or 10 years ago, especially in London.
Really?
And outside the rest of the country, where it was 20% Help to Buy, they're finding they can sell it, but they're barely getting their money back. There are exceptions. There are pockets where house price growth has been stronger, and I'm not generalising for the entire country.
Yeah.
But the housing, and there is no one housing market. There is the London housing market. There's the London flats market, the London houses market. Then there's the suburbs of London, and then you've got the shires, and these are all separate markets, and they all behave differently. I mean, just in the North London postcode, you've got flats actually going up in price, which bucks the trend of the whole of the rest of London, whilst semis and detached houses are coming down in price at the same time. And that reflects a trend in that part of London where people are downsizing from big expensive houses, so that there's this abnormal level of demand for these sort of relatively nice 3-bedroom flats, where you've got first-time buyers trying to upsize to them and downsizers downsizing to them, and that's artificially lifting the price. Not artificially, it is lifting the price of those, but that's what I mean. Every market is different, right? So nothing I say applies uniformly to the whole market. But new build volumes of sales and new build starts are at historic lows. And the reason for that is because nobody can any longer afford to pay the prices that the developers need in order to sell them at a profit.
Right.
Build costs in some areas are now higher than the value of the finished building. So therefore, it's impossible to make a profit in some areas.
So who's going to do that?
Nobody. And this is where it's very, very annoying to hear the government say things like mandatory house building targets. You cannot mandate the private sector to do anything. Look how well that's worked in the car market. You will make electric cars and you will sell electric cars. Consumer says no.
No.
Same with houses. Consumer says no, we're not paying. We can't pay. We're not going to. First-time buyers' awareness of the disappointing performance of property in the last 5 years is rising quickly. And it's not that there isn't a lot of demand from first-time buyers. There is. They're the biggest buying demographic in the country. But they're becoming savvier and they're wiser. They're becoming more aware of the fact that house prices are not doing that like they used to, and they're being much more cautious. And that's translating into a lot of sellers wondering why they can't sell their place.
We saw 2004, this government report saying if we keep building houses at the same rate, there'll be problems with homelessness, affordability and social division. And 20 years later, we are seeing those problems. But is supply, is the number of houses being built the true problem here?
No, it's not. That is the the message and the story that we are repeatedly told is that, more houses is the only solution. And of course, who does that suit? It suits the house builders. And the house builders, remember, I don't know if people are aware of this, are the number one donor to all political parties.
Really?
All political parties. House builders are the number one donor. I think it's 11% of all party donations. That's more than even the banking or finance sector donates. To put it into context, right? So any narrative and story and message and headline coming out of that industry will always be, we must build more houses, and the government must help us build more houses, and the government must make it easier for buyers to buy our houses. But it's actually 20 years of that, and as I said, the chickens are coming home to roost now because they've puffed it so far it can't go any further. And now, despite the population increase on the back of immigration, demographics are changing, and you've got the baby boomer demographic starting to, the next 5 years will be the peak. And this is an insensitive thing to say if you're watching this and you're a boomer, but we're all going to meet our end at some point, right? And demographically, it's the time over the next 5 to 10 years. And that's going to free up a huge amount of larger homes so there's going to be a lot of supply. And where house builders are looking, the timeline for a house builder from starting to decide to build the place to actually selling it is between 5 and 10 years, with buying the land and getting the planning permission, the building and everything else. 10 years from now, the population here is flatlining or even declining, even with immigration. So the problems that we do have that you referred to are caused more by earnings failing to keep up with house prices than they are with not enough houses being built. Now, it's important to point out there are places in the country where there clearly aren't enough homes. But that tends to be in the cities, and it tends to be and the only solution to that, it's not the private sector's responsibility to meet the government's social housing obligations. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
right?
totally.
It is not the private sector's responsibility. Private companies aren't accountable to anyone other than their shareholders and the law. So you can't mandate, say, you will build this many houses. Well, we just haven't got enough money. How can we do it? You can't just tell us to do it. And that's why it's ludicrous that they were ever even allowed to say mandatory targets, because it's a joke. In this year, it's going to be the lowest level of new homes built. For over 25, 30 years. It's just when Labour is making all these big claims, which they were told from the start were mechanically impossible to meet.
Really?
Before the election, people like me stood up and said, with the best will in the world and with a following wind and a downhill, you're not going to meet those targets. It's just not viable if you understand why. They ignored it. They keep on saying, and they're still doubling down on it. And Steve Reed now is going build, baby, build, and he's come into the role after Angela Rayner left, as if he's going to just wave a magic wand and fix the problems that no one else can fix.
I was trying to understand this because 49 out of 50 home builders said the government won't meet the 1.5 million targets. Why is that mismatch between the house builders here and the government saying, yeah, we will?
I wish I knew, and I don't know, why political parties are allowed to make manifesto claims and not be held accountable for it. Because the answer to your question is because they can basically say what they like. And once they're elected, do what they like. And they may pay for it at the next election, but once they're in power. And the other thing is that the political class generally, and there are some notable exceptions, don't have the leadership quality and the strength and competence and sheer skill required to actually get things done. And the politicians we elect they're wrapping paper around the actual government system. Because if you look at it, it doesn't matter which government you pick, not one of them has kept a single manifesto promise. Right? They really haven't. Now, that can't be because they've all decided not to. A lot of those MPs on all sides genuinely would like to deliver the things they're saying they're going to deliver, but they are displaying a lack of understanding of how the process works. Matthew Pennycook, the housing minister at the moment, I actually like him. I think he's he's a guy who genuinely would love to make a difference and fix stuff. But I think he's unfortunately naive about the process. It is an unwinnable, it doesn't matter who's in power, unless someone has a bonfire of regulations. The regulations that have been piled up and up and up and up and up over the years are what's standing in the way. And Steve Reed is saying, oh, I'm going to get rid of those regulations. You can't just rewrite the law. You don't get to do that. And much as it would be a good idea to get rid of all of them, you can't. It's not that simple. Good luck. It won't work. And for a new person in the role to come in and sort of make a claim, hey, I'm going to fix it, no one else could, is naive and frankly, it's taking people for fools to say that. It really is.
If we look at 1970, the ratio between income and house prices was a lot closer. I think it's like 1 to 4, something like that. And since then, they've just diverged, as you've referred to. I mean, what drove that? Why have they gone so far apart?
The culprit, the smoking gun, for the answer to your question, is extended lending multiples.
Right.
So you're right. In the 1970s, it was about 4.5 times mean salaries. House price. The average house price is about 4.5 times the average salary. And don't forget, back in those days, you could buy a house with 1 salary.
Yeah, 1 person working. Amazing.
And now now we're up at 7.5. We got up to nearly 9 in 2022. It's slipped back a little bit as house prices have actually come down, despite what the ONS tells us. They have actually come down. The ONS figures are unreliable, and what they do is they announce, oh, house prices are up 4%, and then they quietly revise them down and down and down every single month for 12 months, typically by about 3%. So they are knowingly overstating house price growth. Knowingly overstating house price growth and not correcting. If you want to go,
that shouldn't be allowed.
It absolutely shouldn't be allowed. But the government seems to act with impunity and a lack of accountability, and we're all paying for it. They never pay for it. We always pay for it. So it was actually the Blair government, Blair and Brown in the 90s, who unlocked this wave of lending that drove house price multiples from 4.5. So the long-term average up until then had been about 4.5. There have been a few bumps like that where it had gone up and then come down again every time the government pulled a lever to try and improve the housing market. Made it worse. And since then, it's pretty much averaged 7.5 times. So from 4.5 times salary to 7.5 times salary during that first Labour government era. So if you're just looking at which policies were enacted that caused house prices to go up, it is that Blair and Brown Labour government that enacted those policies. I mean, the Tories that follow them continue to double down and make it worse. So I'm not in any way levelling the blame at one party or the other. It is the system of government that's let down the housing market and left us in the state that we're in now. And it's much worse than anyone really understands yet. We are in the early stages of a housing market decline that when it's finished, and I think it could last 2 or 3 more years, we're going to look back and it's going to be the greatest housing market downturn. Not in conventional ways. It won't just be prices, right? There'll be places where prices actually hold up. But what you get for the money, the running costs of it, you're going to start to see empty houses just abandoned that can't be sold because the only people who can afford to buy them can't afford to heat them or run them. We are at the end of an age of property decadence, and there's nothing on the horizon that sees it come back anytime in the near future. But unfortunately, to your everyday man and woman in the street, who's had 40 years of programming from news and media and lenders, house prices only go up, house prices double every 10 years, can't go wrong with bricks and mortar, safest houses, blah, blah, blah. It is so deeply ingrained in this country's psyche that it's a safe thing to do to buy a property that there are still people every day throwing themselves under the bus unwittingly, borrowing too much and getting themselves into trouble. And if you are buying a home that is your forever home and you can afford it, it doesn't matter what happens in the future, right? If you're buying a place where you never want to move again, that's it, we're done, we're staying.
You don't care what the price is.
You don't care if you can afford it, absolutely. Owning a home that you can afford and you're staying in long term, these problems won't affect you. But if you're highly leveraged and then need to move, that's when it comes down really badly, like it is for a lot of people right now who bought Help to Buy. And it's still relatively underreported.
You give us some examples of how bad it actually is.
Well, I mean, central London postcodes, so Mayfair, Knightsbridge, around there, you've already seen 50% house price falls in the last few years.
Wow.
Flats across London are at 2016 prices now. If you take into account inflation, it's fallen quite a long way. There are, generally speaking, larger detached houses have seen the biggest falls already. And there are parts of the country, like down in the southwest, you're talking 30-40% drops from the peak, have already happened. No one reports it. There's no index just for detached country houses. And if you do it for the whole, like Zoopla does it for the whole country, it kind of irons out the truth into this neutral average. And the problem with averages, which is all we ever hear about, is that averages bring down the peaks and iron out the troughs into a sort of, no, it's all kind of, it's fine, it's not as great as it was, but it's still okay. And it's not. And the saddest thing now, and I know that there's little sympathy for boomers waking up to find that the nest egg in their property is no longer going to be enough to cover their retirement costs, their living costs for the rest of their life. I mean, it's horrible. I mean, I hear it daily, both from people I know personally and also in my followers on Moving Home with Charlie, that there are people who have worked hard, bought a home, it's gone up in value a lot. That's not their fault. They weren't being greedy. They've lived in a home. They're now finding they can't afford to heat it, right? Because the nest is empty. 4 or 5 bedroom house, just the parents there now. Yeah. Kids visit occasionally or grandkids visit occasionally. But the heating of that house has become genuinely unaffordable. So they think, oh great, well, we know that prices have been going up for decades. We've owned this house 20, 30 years. Now we can sell. Those are the guys having the biggest shock. And it's a double whammy for them because, first of all, they're finding out, and even the ones who hear this message and go, right, we'll be careful, we won't be greedy, we won't overprice it, are suffering from estate agents overvaluing and even agents being behind the curve of what's happening with prices. So the double whammy they're suffering is their properties are typically fetching 20 to 25% less than they expected. That's a big hit on your nest egg, right? That's whammy number one. Whammy number two is the property that they're downsizing to hasn't fallen.
Right.
And so the leftover equity they're expecting to have and put in the bank to live off, it's gone.
Because of these two different markets moving differently, right?
Okay. And on top of that, you then got the inflation, rampant inflation for homeowners. I mean, owner-occupier housing inflation is still 6-7%. So what they do have left over isn't going to cut it. I had one follower on my live stream. I mean, in real time, it dawned on her. I can't move. They'd had the house on the market for a year. Their plan was that they had a plan, and she just hadn't come to terms with the fact that was never going to happen. And then she asked in the live chat. She said, "Well, what do we do?" I didn't have an answer. I said, your choice is stay where you are or downsize to somewhere smaller than you would have liked. But it's just when you have just worked hard, been employed, saved up, paid off your mortgage, been a good contributing member of society, get to this point of life and find we can't afford the comfortable retirement we had hoped for.
So the rug's been pulled from underneath you.
Yeah. And I don't agree with the people who blame boomers for this. They didn't know this was going to happen when they bought the house 30 years ago. No idea. There's government policy for this. I mean, you do see boomers out there spending their money left, right, and centre, and they're with big pensions, final salary pensions. Lovely, very nice. Thank you very much. But it's not all of them. A lot of them have been hurt, and the kids who thought they were going to be getting a deposit to buy a house now won't be. And this is going to play out slowly over the next few years. And I sound like the Grim Reaper when it comes to the housing market. And people think I'm trying to put people off buying, and I'm not. what I'm trying to do is to get people to accept, look, the market is the market. I'm not saying I don't have an opinion on prices. I'm just trying to help people make sure that if they buy a home, it's a home they can afford and keep and stay in, and not end up being chewed up and spat out by the lenders who will chase you into the grave and beyond it for money you owe them.
You mentioned government policy. I mean, what are the key things that you think need to change to try and make things better?
First and foremost, whenever governments meddle in marketplaces that are supposed to be free, unfettered marketplaces, they almost always make it worse. They're a government. Their job is to keep us safe and create the environment for prosperity. That's it. They're not supposed to start getting involved.
Yeah.
They've got involved in the car industry and they've pretty much killed it with their mandates on wiping out internal combustion engines by 2030 and all that kind of stuff. You know, the reality of owning electric cars, and I had one for 4 years, and it's just not quite good enough. And the depreciation's been horrible. So every time a government has meddled in the housing market, without exception, there are no exceptions to this, they've made things worse.
Right.
So the first thing is leave it alone. Don't come in with legislation to help, because it won't. With the best of intentions. I mean, the Renters' Rights Bill that was debated in Parliament yesterday, that's its final debate. It's now going to happen. I think it's got royal assent, I can't remember, but it's now all but done and over the line. It comes into effect in Q2 or Q3 next year. The Renters' Rights Bill, let's just put to one side whether or not it was ideologically motivated. Let's just give it the benefit of the doubt, and let's assume that actually it was just for the benefit of tenants being unfairly treated by landlords, and there are plenty of them and they need protecting, and to try and improve the rentals market. The way they've executed it and the way it's going to happen, as someone who's personally constructed software systems to operate lettings businesses on behalf of landlords and tenants and agents, what they're doing is going to cause the biggest chaos in the rental market in living memory. Okay. It's going to be I can't overstate how much trouble it's going to cause. Not only stuff that we can see is going to go wrong because of the way they're doing it, but the unintended consequences beyond that. Now, I'd love to be wrong. Genuinely, I'd love to be wrong. And I hope that actually, if I'm wrong, these measures actually end up overall improving it. And whilst they will give improved protections to some people, the cost of it is going to be worse. Now,
Well, what do you think will go wrong? Well, that's some examples of that.
So, in a nutshell, the best way to summarize it is it's making the risk-reward equation for landlords no longer worth it.
Right.
Now, they've been doing that for a while. They've been changing policies, changing taxes, Section 24 stuff, going back over 10 years. And we've seen landlords selling up, moving out. And what we've seen at the same time as that, and this actually makes me really quite cross, these are policies that were lobbied for by Shelter, that everyone thinks is a homelessness charity, and it isn't. It's never provided anyone with shelter, not one person once ever. And it spends £80 million a year on advice and lobbying. £20 million a year it spends on fundraising. Right? And these guys lobbied for these changes, and they were ideologically motivated under the guise of helping homelessness. And as a direct result of those policies, government statistics on Gov.uk has for the last, going back to the Tories, this is, Labour's making it worse, but caused the fastest increase in homelessness on record. As a direct result of government policies to try and improve it, we've now got spiking homelessness. Over 1,000 families or 1,000 households every month are being made homeless. That's government official figures. And the number one reason, or there's a long list of reasons, but the number one, which is I think 65 or 68% of them, landlords selling up.
Right.
Landlords are selling up because of the change in government policy that's making the finances just not work out anymore. And the landlords aren't losing. They're just choosing to exit and go and put their money elsewhere. Who's losing? Rents have gone up. Homelessness has gone up. And even though the cold, hard evidence of that is there in the government's own figures, they won't even acknowledge it publicly. Okay, so if you wanted evidence that government intervention only makes things worse, it already exists. What can they do now? I mean, the renters' rights bill is a done deal, and I can't see it's ever going to get stopped. But I wish it would, because it's going to make it worse. It's going to make rents go higher, and it's going to make homelessness worse. But separately from that, back into the sales market now, the best thing the government could do, is to permanently scrap stamp duty for primary homes for UK citizens.
Right.
Okay. So if they're overseas buyers, they still pay stamp duty. If you're buying a second home, you still pay stamp duty. Landlords still pay stamp duty. But if it's a primary residence, if you're moving from one home to another, if you're downsizing from your family home into your retirement home, you don't pay stamp duty.
Yeah.
That would unleash the biggest burst of economic activity that anything else the government could do. Never mind the housing market, because there are the pent-up demand to move from downsizers as well as upsizers and first-time buyers is so much, and every time somebody moves house, they spend around about £20,000 to £25,000. Okay, now that's the combined seller of the spend of the seller and the buyer.
No.
And it's a one-off spend because of your move. Now, Zoopla did research and has worked out that if all obstructions to moving were removed, transaction volumes would more than double. Now, that would add between 1% and 2% to GDP. It would pull us clean out of recession. And it would do so by people spending money in their local economy. Decorators, builders, removals, local shops, gardener, you name it, right? Roofing, all of these things that people spend money on when they move house. Those trades right now are suffering. So it is the most obvious low-hanging fruit to scrap it. Now, they are talking about potentially scrapping stamp duty below $500,000 in the budget. But it's a half measure, because that won't help all the downsizers that want to downsize.
Right.
And they're going to try and replace it with a property tax. Now, I'm not for or against that property tax, replacing council tax, the annual thing. We have to wait and see what they do with that. But if they were to simply abolish permanently stamp duty for primary homes being bought or sold for UK citizens, the money they would lose, which is about £7 billion a year, would be more than replaced by the increase in VAT, corporation tax, PAYE, from all the businesses now getting an uplift. There would be job creation, massive job creation would happen, on the back of which they get more national insurance, and it would reduce the welfare bill. To say nothing of the social mobility that it opens up. It would be the biggest win of any government, and the government that's brave enough to, and they're so scared. It's £7 billion a year. I mean, that's half the monthly interest bill on the country's debt. It's nothing. But they're spineless, the lot of them. They won't do these obviously beneficial things that help everybody. And this is not an ideological standpoint. This is just let people get on with their lives. Let people move house if they want to move house. Don't put a barrier in the way to moving house, which is what stamp duty is. Dominic Frisby says the same. He's done a lot of promoting the idea of stamp duty. So, I mean, I have my fingers crossed that in the budget they will do something clever and intelligent and positive for the housing market. But so far, if they do, it'll be the first time that's ever happened.
Do you think political uncertainty is affecting people who might be buying a home or selling a home? What impact does that have?
Yeah, that's very, very frustrating. And it's also avoidable. Okay, so the government teases these maybe we will, maybe we won't, property tax, council tax, stamp duty, capital gains on your primary residence, might do it above $500,000, but nothing's confirmed. And of course that creates real uncertainty. And for a lot of people, we can't make a big decision that we won't even complete before the budget now. So yeah, activities drop. It hasn't stopped. There are certain markets where it has killed activity almost stone dead, but people still need to move. Right? The number one reasons for people moving are death, debt, and divorce. Then you've got growing family, job relocation. All of these reasons are reasons people need to move, and they can't wait. Okay, but for people where moving is discretionary, yeah, they'll just go, I'm not going to do anything yet. We need to wait and see what happens. Now, in this particular case, I suspect that's going to be a mistake for more people than it benefits. I think that they're waiting for an unspecified reason. And I worry that a lot of people are going to end up wishing they hadn't waited, especially sellers.
Do you think Germany is more of a kind of rental market? Do you think a move towards that would work here? Is that a possibility?
It works well. There are other European countries as well where it's predominantly rental. But it's a cultural thing that goes back generations.
Right.
It's in their DNA. It's government is set up for that. Taxes are set up for that, and the quality of homes they have is much better as well. Especially if you go into Scandinavia and you see these new build blocks of apartments, they're amazing. I mean, they're modern, but they are really solid things. These structures that are going to be there for at least 100 years. And if you think about how many people in this country have built and based their savings and investments around property, you're talking about such a fundamental upheaval to move to a rent-based. Now, is it going to happen? Well, it's already started to happen. Home ownership has fallen. I don't remember the numbers, but I think it's from 73% to 63% of home ownership. So it's moving away from ownership and back into renting. And in fact, already because of the upheaval in the housing market now, people being forced to sell for less than they wanted to aren't able to buy, and they're almost being forced back into renting. And of course, that's making rents go up. Rent caps don't work unless you go fully communist.
Yeah, well,
and you go fully government. I mean, Singapore gets it right, but that's with their stamp duty, very, very clever tiered stamp duty, and effectively the government does control first-time buyer house prices. It ensures that productive young people can buy a home. It actually controls that very cleverly. But there's a different government there, different system of government. I worry that one of the biggest problems is simply that our system of government, being one of the oldest in the world, is so far beyond the point where it's achievable to modify it in a way that works, that I don't see how we get out of this.
Look at the financial side of things a bit with you. Fred Harrison, who predicted the two previous financial crashes, he's saying next year is the next one in the cycle. I know you talked about this a bit on your YouTube. Do you think we will see a crash in house prices in 2026?
I've said all along that I expect a slide, not a crash.
Right.
But and a crash is a very ambiguous term, and you could argue that some prices have already crashed because there are properties selling for 30-40% lower than they did a couple of years ago. So there has already been one in certain areas and certain demographics. Has the whole market crashed? No. Is it going to? No, I don't think it's going to. I think that there is going to be a severe and painful correction for people who do own property already. I don't think it's going to affect first-time buyer prices very much. I think they will come down a bit, but not enough to call it a crash at the first-time buyer level. As wages are still growing up quite strongly, it's making the house price to wage ratio improve. So, I mean, the least painful route to a more affordable housing market is for house prices to flatline whilst wages rise.
Yeah.
That's I've always said that, and people have accused me of predicting a house price crash. I've never predicted one. I said I've expected house prices to slide over however long it takes, and I thought it was going to be 3 years. It's going to be longer than that. So yeah, in 2026, when you look at job losses, you look at the economy now, you look at all of the indicators that are out there, new builds stopping building is an early indicator that no one's buying new builds. I suspect that Fred will be proved right, whether it's a crash or not. I think the downturn, however it's characterized, yes, I can't see how we avoid it.
There's also a lot of millionaires leaving Britain. I think we're second in the list behind China. What impact will that have?
Well, that's really sad, because that's actually sad. It's not sad for the millionaires, right? They've got the luxury of choosing where they go.
Yeah.
But it's sad for all the entrepreneurs who want angel investors and venture capitalists to help back their startup business to create jobs, because we all know that's where growth and job creation comes from, is from risk-taking, job-creating, money-investing, wealthy people. And if they go, the people with the ideas of starting up businesses here won't have the capital to do it, and the jobs won't get created. Now that's before you even start looking at AI and the impact that's going to have. So it's, how is it going to affect the housing market? Well, it's going to accelerate. It's going to have several effects. It's going to accelerate the fall in prices of the more valuable properties if they choose to sell up. Some of them aren't selling. They're just leaving the houses and coming back and visiting, you know. But where it's going to have the most notable effect will be on the lack of growth in the economy. And that has a massive impact on house prices and mobility.
I also wanted to just ask you a bit about deals. I think we all know someone who's had a house deal go through. It seems maybe 1 in 3 deals do fall through. Yeah. Is that a normal rate? Is that the same in other countries? And what can we do to try and kind of improve on that?
No, it's worse than most other countries. It's always been that sort of level. There is a long list of contributing factors to it. And it's a game of probabilities. For example, first-time buyers are the most likely to pull out of a purchase simply because they changed their mind.
Right.
Okay, you can't legislate against that. I mean, you can force them into a binding contract earlier, potentially, and that would probably scare a lot of them away. So the industry doesn't like that, because it means, well, you'd reduce fall-throughs, but you'd also reduce sales in total. I'm not for or against that. But the number one culprit of avoidable fall-throughs is a lack of preparation by both seller and buyer. Okay, now that's where estate agents can add real value, and they can help people get prepared, but they mostly don't bother. And one of the reasons is that people think that estate agents' fees are too high. Well, they're not. They're too low. The reason the quality of service in this country from agents is so bad is because what they're paid now is not enough to pay for the team necessary to do the job properly. And even at 2%, and by the way, I am the harshest critic there is of estate agents, but it's not all of them. It's most of them, not all of them, right?
They have a bad rep. Yeah, that's unfair.
No, as an industry, no. As an industry, they entirely deserve the reputation they've got. They are dishonest, overvaluing, manipulative, businesses at a time when you really need someone you can trust to help you through a stressful process. Now, it's a question of don't hate the players, hate the game. They don't do that because they like it. They don't want fall-throughs either. But there's a toxic game being played behind the scenes, which goes back to the incentives I was talking about earlier on, where the big corporates are creating warped incentives that are forcing this behavior. So most of the bad behavior you see in the estate agency industry actually trickles down from corporate policies. And where small businesses, where the corporates are so effective at signing up customers, whether they sell or not, that the smaller businesses are being forced into playing the same game. Number one game being overvaluing. I mean, the fastest way to set your property sale up for a fall through is to bring it onto the market at too high a price. That's the first thing. And the second thing is the number of sellers who get an offer, accept it, and then go, oh, what do we do now? And this is partly down to the agent as well, who should say, you should be ready. You need to have your solicitor lined up and your paperwork ready. So you often get the case where buyers make their offer, have it accepted, the buyer is ready to proceed, but the seller just isn't ready, and then takes 6-8 weeks just to get the paperwork started. And of course, they'll often lose the buyer at that point, because the buyer's like, and then the seller starts going, oh, we haven't got anywhere else to move to. We'll have to wait while we find another house. So it's dithering through lack of preparation, where estate agents should be ensuring that the sellers are better prepared. Why don't the agents do that? Because they are making money just on listing houses. They don't even sell. Again, the wrong incentives.
Right.
So if the incentives were improved, this problem would go away. You don't need to change the law. You don't need technology. You just need to change the incentives. And as I've proved, because I'm working with one agent as a case study to prove this, Carrington's in southwest London. And since I've been working with them, which is 9 months now, they're exchanging on everything in under 8 weeks. I mean, this is less than half the typical time. They're selling everything in under 28 days, exchanging within 8 weeks, and so far have 0 fall-throughs. That's with no tech and no legislation. It's just making certain sellers are prepared before they launch to the market. So everything's ready to go. Legals, pre-sale survey gets done, which improves the buyer's situation. And they qualify the buyers and say, look, you've got to be ready to buy, because if you're not, someone else will be. So they've got properly prepared buyers, properly prepared sellers. So once the price is agreed, it goes through. So this is proof that it's not the system that's broken, because the system works perfectly if people come prepared. It's the wrong incentives. Right? The incentives are not there to get people properly prepared. And one of the lacking incentives is estate agency fees are too low. And I always say to sellers, if you're choosing agents and it comes down to 2 agents and you're making your decision based on fee or value of the property they've given you, you haven't found the right agent yet, and you should keep looking. Your choice of agent should be based on how comfortable you are, they know what they're doing, and they're going to get this done and get you the best price, whatever that may be. If you're choosing on fee or valuation, you are very likely to have a very bad experience.
Charlie Lamdin, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks very much.